Across the North Atlantic, a small chain of limestone islands sits far from any continent, surrounded by deep blue water and rings of shallow reef. On the surface, this place looks like a narrow strip of pastel houses, narrow roads, and sheltered harbours where land is scarce, but protected bays, sounds, and channels give the island more room than its map suggests. Here, ferries, buses, scooters, fishing boats, and reef-edge dive sites all share the same tight geometry, turning clear water into both infrastructure and risk for people who live and work at the ocean's edge. In this place, the sea is not just scenery. It is protection, economy, hazard, and daily route, all at once, for an island that feels small but is never simple. This is Bermuda. Bermuda does not look like a hard place at first. From above, it looks almost too bright to be practical. Narrow land, blue water, pale roofs, boats, and roads fitted tightly into the coastline. But the real question is not why people visit. The harder question is why more than 60,000 people keep living here, on about 54 square kilometers of land, far out in the North Atlantic, with no big river, no wide farmland, and no mineral cushion underneath the view. The useful comparison is not luxury versus poverty. It is surface area versus obligation. The island must carry the duties of a much larger place, on a base smaller than many American cities. When the base is this small, ordinary services begin to feel like weight carried in public. The island sits roughly 650 miles east of Cape Hatteras, North Carolina. That distance matters. It means every ordinary thing has to cross ocean before it becomes ordinary here. A grocery shelf, a fuel tank, a spare part, a restaurant plate, a construction job, even a quiet commute all depend on a chain that begins somewhere else. Bermuda is beautiful, but beauty is not the system. The system is how a small place keeps moving when almost nothing it needs starts on the island. That ocean gap is why a calm aerial shot still carries tension. The sea is the highway, the boundary, the storage delay, and the reason every arrival has to be planned. The island's scale turns distance into a daily fact. Distance sets the price. That is why the landscape feels so controlled. Houses sit close. Roads bend around shorelines. Harbours matter more than they first appear. Even the roofs are not just roofs. Bermuda had to turn architecture, regulation, ports, tourism, insurance, and habit into a survival plan. The island is not rich because it has resources in the ground. It became valuable because it learned to manage scarcity so carefully that the scarcity itself became a kind of discipline. A viewer can read the island through repeated practical shapes: the roof that catches rain, the harbour that receives goods, the cove that shelters boats, and the road that cannot simply widen forever. Every wide view should still suggest a narrow operating room. The map keeps tightening. The government of Bermuda's 2025 digest reported an estimated year-end population of 63,179. On a map, that number can look small. On this island, it is dense. It means schools, homes, vehicles, churches, workers, visitors, offices, ferries, trash, water, food, and healthcare. All share a very narrow physical base. There is no empty inland reserve waiting to absorb mistakes. When the land is this limited, every decision leaves a visible mark. Population density is not just a statistic here. It changes noise, traffic, household cost, land value, waste, and the emotional pressure of knowing that everyone shares the same narrow strip. The population figure gives the landscape human weight. The count makes it real. The beaches, forts, reefs, and harbour will matter later, but they all lead back to the same demand. Bermuda is a place where ordinary life survives by making space, water, money, and coastline do more work than they would have to do almost anywhere else. A beautiful image has to earn its place here by explaining how the island functions and why people remain. On many islands, fresh water begins in a river valley or a lake. In Bermuda, the old answer begins on the roof. The island has no freshwater rivers, no lakes, and no natural springs that can support a population at this scale. So the roof became infrastructure. Those bright stepped surfaces are designed to catch rain, slow it, clean it, and send it into tanks. A house here is not only shelter, it is also part of the water system. This is one of the few places where the most memorable architecture is also a daily utility. The roofline is a habit, a warning, and a quiet form of engineering. Rainfall becomes a household asset before it becomes a weather mood, and the roof is where that fact first becomes visible. That is why water discipline in Bermuda is not a rural memory or an old-fashioned custom. It remains part of how a modern household understands comfort, cost, weather, and the quiet responsibility of living on a small island. That changes the meaning of a rainy day. Rain is not background weather, it is supply. A dry season is not just an inconvenience for a garden, it is a reminder that the household depends on stored water. The system asks people to think about use, storage, maintenance, and timing. It makes domestic life more deliberate. The island may look relaxed from the air, but the basics underneath it are exact. That makes conservation less like a slogan and more like household arithmetic. The island teaches people to connect a tap, a tank, a cloud, and a bill without needing a speech about it. Conservation here starts at home because storage starts at home. Even a small pause at the tap becomes part of the island's water culture. That habit changes how the island feels after rain. A full tank gives a household confidence. A long dry stretch asks everyone to notice the tap. The water system is private enough to be personal and shared enough to shape the whole culture of daily care. Storage shapes the habit. White roofs also reveal something about Bermudian design. The island did not wait for one huge engineering fix. It spread the solution across thousands of homes. Each roof collects, each tank stores, each household becomes a small piece of public resilience. That does not make life primitive. It makes it coordinated. Modern services exist, but the old logic is still visible in the buildings themselves. The distributed design also spreads responsibility. Instead of one distant reservoir carrying the whole story, thousands of small collection points turn private homes into part of the public answer. The roofline quietly teaches the island's first lesson. Responsibility is distributed. Water also explains why open land is so precious. Ponds, wetlands, and green pockets are not empty scenery waiting to be filled. They are part of the island's environmental memory. In a place without rivers, small bodies of water and protected ground carry extra value. They soften heat, hold habitat, slow runoff, and remind the island that every paved surface changes the way rain moves. When rain runs badly, the island feels it. When protected land disappears, water and heat behave differently. This is why small green spaces can matter more than they first appear. Green pockets help protect the water story from becoming only pipes and tanks. Open ground changes runoff. On a continent, water can feel distant from the house. In Bermuda, the supply falls directly on the roof, moves across a private surface, and disappears into a tank below the floor. Water is above your head, under your feet, and inside the choices a household makes every day. The emotional hook of Bermuda is not desperation, it is composure. People live normally here because generations built habits around limits. The same white roofs that make the island photogenic also make it honest. They show a community that had to make its most basic resource visible, personal, and shared across the whole landscape. That visible honesty is one reason the island feels real. The prettiest roof in the shot is also doing a job that cannot be postponed until some abstract future. That is a more intimate form of infrastructure than most places require. The design is honest. Once water is understood, the next question is everything else. Bermuda cannot feed itself like a large agricultural country. It cannot fuel itself from local oil fields. It cannot manufacture most of what a modern household or business uses in a week. The island lives through import chains, and those chains turn harbours into lifelines. A port here is not only a place where boats look good against turquoise water, it is where distance becomes groceries, building materials, medicine, engines, and work. The port is therefore a kind of second shoreline inside the economy. It turns outside production into island life, and every container or service link carries the cost of distance. A late shipment can turn geography into a bill. The sea sets terms. That distance shapes prices and expectations. A thing that feels cheap and abundant on the mainland may arrive here with freight, storage, limited shelf space, and a smaller market attached to it. The island's size removes the luxury of waste. If a shipment is late, a repair waits. If demand spikes, options narrow. The economy has to plan around the ocean, even when the ocean looks calm. This does not mean panic, it means awareness. Bermuda can be wealthy and still price sensitive, because even wealth has to wait for freight, fuel, labor, storage, and weather. Planning replaces the mainland habit of assuming more is nearby. Delay has weight. The imported day also makes transportation feel different. Roads are tight because the land is tight. Boats and ferries are not decorative extras. They are part of how a small island spreads pressure across water. Every harbour, cove, and shoreline access point carries a practical meaning. Movement is not just about getting from one pretty place to another. It is about keeping a dense island from choking on its own limits. The landscape has no room for careless circulation. A narrow bend, a small dock, a short pier, and a busy junction can carry the pressure of a whole supply chain. Small roads make large dependencies visible. Movement is rationed by space. This is where Bermuda's wealth can be misunderstood. Expensive houses and clean harbours do not mean the island escaped scarcity. They mean the island priced scarcity into everyday life. A high-income service economy sits on top of a physical base that still has to import food, fuel, vehicles, equipment, and many construction inputs. The money helps, but it does not erase the geography. That is the paradox the title points toward. The island did not become valuable by digging wealth out of the ground. It became valuable by making trust and access work across water. The economy has to earn enough to pay for distance. Money meets geography. The visible rhythm is quiet. Roads, boats, small beaches, houses, docks, and protected water. But behind that quiet rhythm is a disciplined supply chain. A modern island can look effortless only when a lot of effort stays off camera. The real drama is not a storm or a mystery. It is the normal day arriving by sea again and again. A long-form video should let those quiet logistics breathe. The viewer needs time to feel that the calm harbour is not a pause in the story. It is the machinery. The harbour is calm only when the chain behind it works. The harbour keeps score. That is why Bermuda's ordinary scenes carry more weight than they seem to. A boat in a harbour, a road above the coast, a roof above a tank, and a small cluster of homes are all part of the same answer. The island lives by connecting small pieces into a working whole. This connection is what separates a real Bermuda film from a generic island reel. The image is not just attractive, it explains a dependency. Those links give ordinary images their pressure. Dependency becomes visible. And because the whole is small, mistakes have nowhere to hide. Imports, waste, fuel, road space, and water storage all return to the same narrow island. Bermuda's discipline is not decorative, it is what lets daily life keep its shape. The same fact returns in different forms, but the consequences change. Price, storage, traffic, waste, repair, and patience. Those consequences are what daily life actually feels. This is how a beautiful island becomes a logistical discipline. Patience becomes infrastructure. Hamilton Harbour looks calm from above, but this is where Bermuda's smallness becomes administration. A capital on a tiny island cannot sprawl like a mainland city. It has to concentrate banks, government, shipping relationships, offices, visitors, commuters, and harbour movement in a narrow, urban edge. The skyline is modest by world city standards, yet the work connected to it reaches far beyond the island. That closeness makes Hamilton a useful contrast to giant financial districts. Here, the island's professional reputation is visible beside water, ferries, trees, and neighbourhoods, rather than hidden in endless towers. The city edge works because it concentrates trust. The signal is concentration. Bermuda's modern economy is strongly tied to international business, especially insurance and reinsurance. Government and Bermuda Monetary Authority reporting counted 1,239 insurers registered at the end of 2024. That number is startling because the physical island is so small. It shows how Bermuda converted legal trust, regulation, tax structure, professional services, and time zone position into economic weight. Numbers like that should not be thrown away as trivia. They explain how a small place can support high wages, imported goods, government services, and a level of global attention far beyond its size. The insurance count gives the skyline a second meaning. The number changes the view. Hamilton is not simply where that money is parked. It is where the island's reputation has to be maintained. A small jurisdiction cannot afford to look careless. The harbour, offices, streets, and rules are part of one signal. This is a place built to handle risk, even while it lives with physical risk every day. That contrast gives the capital its charge. Risk is the bridge between the economy and the landscape. Bermuda sells expertise in risk while living with hurricanes, shipping dependence, limited land, and water discipline at home. Risk is not only sold here, it is lived here. Risk links office and shoreline. The harbour also keeps the story grounded. Insurance may sound invisible, but the island around it is not. Workers still move through streets. Boats still cross water. Buildings still need power, cooling, repairs, deliveries, and people. The financial engine does not float above Bermuda. It sits inside a place where every square foot is contested by geography. That is why the harbour view stays important, even during a finance explanation. It prevents the narration from floating into abstraction and keeps the island's physical limits in frame. The harbour keeps finance tied to place. Place keeps the claim honest. Hamilton's most interesting feature is not height. It is compression. Business, government, harbour, homes, visitors, and daily errands all sit close enough to feel each other's pressure. The capital connects local routines to global contracts, while the rock beneath it remains the same size. Before Hamilton became the modern centre, St. George carried Bermuda's Atlantic beginning. Its old streets and fortifications belong to a UNESCO World Heritage property, and that status matters because it reminds the viewer that the island was never just a beach stop. It was a strategic point in the Atlantic, a settlement exposed to weather, ships, empire, defence, and supply, long before tourism softened the image. The age of the town gives the film a different kind of evidence. It proves that the island's resource problem is not new. Only the tools and industries have changed. The old town keeps the island's memory anchored. Memory has weight. Stone changes the mood here. Fort walls, old church ruins, and tight lanes make the island feel older and more serious. A small settlement on a remote rock had to think about defense, storage, repair, religion, trade, and authority. The picturesque surface is real, but it is not the whole story. Under it is a long history of people trying to make permanence in a place that offered very little margin. Stone is useful because it slows the narration down. It asks the viewer to imagine building permanence before modern imports, before easy communication, and before the island had its current economic reputation. Stone makes the past feel physical rather than decorative. The stone walls slow the mood because they make Bermuda's older risks feel physical rather than decorative. St. George also shows why rules matter on a small island. Heritage cannot be treated as empty decoration. Once a place is this old and this limited, preservation, tourism, housing, traffic, and everyday use all compete for the same streets. The town survives by being managed. That management can feel invisible to visitors, but residents live inside it. In a small place, heritage is not stored behind a museum wall. It sits beside present-day needs, and that makes preservation a living negotiation rather than a simple display. Rules protect heritage because pressure never disappears. Preservation has pressure. The fortifications make the Atlantic visible as a force, not a backdrop. They look outward because the old danger came from the sea and the old connection came from the sea. That double role still defines Bermuda. The ocean isolates the island, supplies it, threatens it, protects it, and sells it to visitors. St. George keeps that contradiction in stone. The old military view turns the sea from scenery into exposure. Every horizon line suggests approach, delay, help, danger, and the need to be ready before anything appears. The horizon turns history back toward the sea. The sea remains present. In this version of the Bermuda story, St. George is not a nostalgia break. It is evidence. People stayed here by building rules before comfort, defense before leisure, and community before abundance. The island's beauty came later, or at least became easier to sell later. The habit of living with limits came first. The chapter works best when it lets the viewer feel continuity. The island's modern systems did not replace its older instincts. They grew from the same need to manage risk. Continuity is one of Bermuda's quiet resources. Old habits continue. The South Shore is where many viewers think they already understand Bermuda. Pink sand, clear water, limestone edges, and bright coves make the island feel like a finished postcard. But the beach is not an escape from the resource story. It is part of it. On a rock, without big natural resources, beauty becomes an economic asset, and an asset has to be protected, accessed, maintained, and shared. That is why the camera should not linger only as a tourist. It should notice access paths, houses behind the shore, erosion lines, parked vehicles, and the way public beauty needs constant care. The shore is valuable because it remains recognizable. The asset is exposed. Horseshoe Bay and the surrounding coast do not only attract cameras, they attract spending, jobs, transport pressure, maintenance costs, environmental stress, and public expectations. Tourism can help pay for island life, but it also asks the island to perform itself every day. The beach has to stay beautiful while thousands of feet, vehicles, boats, storms, and business cycles pass through it. If a famous shore disappoints, Bermuda loses more than a nice view. It loses part of its international argument. That is a different kind of pressure from water scarcity, but it comes from the same geography. There is only so much coast. There are only so many roads to reach it, only so much room for parking, hotels, homes, restaurants, and protected habitat. A beach that looks open is still part of a crowded island system. This is where a small island faces a hard balance. It must welcome visitors without letting the visitor economy consume the very coast that gives it value. Visitor, pleasure, and resident life use the same constrained map. The map is shared. The strongest Bermuda beach footage works when it keeps both truths together. The place is genuinely beautiful. The color is not fake, but the beauty is doing work. It supports employment, reputation, family leisure, visitor demand, and the island's global image. The sand may look effortless, but the economy around it is carefully staged by real labor and real rules. The labor behind the postcard includes cleaners, drivers, hotel workers, boat operators, guides, restaurant staff, planners, inspectors, and residents who share the same roads, after the visitors leave. Work is hidden inside almost every leisure image. Work hides in leisure. The limestone coast also reminds us that Bermuda is not a flat resort platform. It is an eroding edge. Waves cut, storms reshape, cliffs hold and fail, and shallow water changes color over reef and sand. The coast earns money, but it is also fragile. That fragility makes management part of the view. The geology does not care about marketing. Limestone, sand, surf, and storm energy keep working whether the season is profitable or not, so management has to think beyond the next photograph. The coast changes whether or not the market is ready. The shore keeps changing. For many people, this is the easiest chapter to watch, and the easiest chapter to misunderstand. The beach is not proof that life here is easy. It is proof that Bermuda turned one of its few natural advantages into a public stage, an export, and a responsibility. A relaxed viewer can enjoy the color, but the narration should add the adult stake. This beauty is income, identity, and environmental liability at once. That adult stake keeps the beach from becoming filler. The stake is adult. So when the camera leaves the sand and returns to houses, roads, and harbour water, the story does not change. The beach is one more limited resource doing more than one job. It sells the island, rests the island, exposes the island, and reminds residents what must not be wasted. That makes the South Shore central to the resource question. It is one of the island's strongest assets precisely because it cannot be treated as unlimited. Limited beauty is still limited. Beauty has limits. Near the shore, every visitor route still depends on access, maintenance, restraint, and people doing quiet work after the view has been sold. That is why the coast can feel peaceful and serious at the same time. It gives Bermuda its softest images, but it carries some of the hardest economics. The final beach beat should feel open, not empty. It leaves space for the viewer to understand that pleasure itself has become part of the island's economy. The release should feel earned, not empty. The pause matters. That is why beach access, maintenance, and restraint belong in the same conversation as beauty. Beyond the beach, Bermuda's reef system changes the meaning of the ocean. The water is not just open blue space, it is structure, barrier, habitat, danger, and memory. Reefs help break wave energy and create the shallow colors visitors remember, but they also limit navigation and hold a record of shipwrecks, storms, fishing, diving, and ecological pressure. The reef is also why aerial footage can feel layered. Color changes are not just decoration, they hint at depth, bottom, current, coral, and the routes boats can or cannot take. The colors are information as much as beauty. Color marks structure. Underwater footage gives the island a second map. Fish, coral, sand channels, and broken light show a living edge around a small landmass. That edge matters because Bermuda's survival has always depended on reading the sea correctly. The same water that brings visitors and imports can punish carelessness quickly. A place this small cannot separate land policy from ocean policy for long. What happens on the shore reaches the water, and what weakens in the water returns to the shore. Land and reef share one environmental ledger. The ledger is shared. The reef also complicates the idea of zero resources. Bermuda may lack rivers, mines, and broad farmland, but it has marine value, beauty, biodiversity, fishery, protection, recreation, scientific interest, and tourism appeal. Those are resources, but they are not resources you can burn through once and replace easily. They have to remain alive to keep working. The resource is therefore conditional. It exists only if restraint exists too. That makes the reef one of Bermuda's clearest examples of value that depends on care. Care is what keeps the resource from shrinking. Care keeps value alive. That is why diving and fishing footage should not feel like a vacation insert. It belongs in the island's operating system. A fishing boat near the reef is connected to food, skill, weather, fuel, regulation, and tradition. A diver in clear water is connected to tourism, ecology, safety, and the fragile reputation of the place. The human presence should stay modest here. Boats, divers, and fishing activity matter, but they should not overwhelm the sense that the island's outer boundary is alive on its own terms. Human activity belongs here, but it is not the whole scene. Scale belongs to the reef. The open Atlantic is never far away. Bermuda's reef platform gives shelter, but it does not make the island invulnerable. Hurricanes, sea level pressure, warming water, and coastal erosion all meet this small place directly. The reef is protection, but it is also a warning. The boundary is alive, and living boundaries can weaken. This also keeps the film away from cheap mystery. The real ocean story is already strong enough. Ecology, navigation, weather, protection, and limits all meet in one visible edge. The true ocean story does not need myth. Reality beats myth. The most useful way to see these waters is not as decoration. They are the island's outer infrastructure. They shape where boats move, where waves break, where visitors swim, where marine life gathers, and where risk begins. On a bigger landmass, people can forget the edge. In Bermuda, the edge is never out of the story. Calling the reef infrastructure is not a metaphor for decoration. It actually changes wave energy, boat movement, tourism, habitat, and the safety of the shoreline. Protection is practical, not poetic. Protection has function. That constant edge gives the island some of its emotional power. The water is beautiful enough to invite you in, and serious enough to remind you that the invitation has terms. People live here by respecting that double meaning. The beauty catches the eye first, then the consequence slowly gives it weight. A reef chapter should breathe, because the viewer needs time to look. But the silence is not empty. Every fish, waveline, and turquoise shelf is part of the answer to why life can continue on such a small rock. The chapter can end with water because water is where the island's argument keeps returning. Shelter and exposure, value and vulnerability, invitation and warning. The water closes the loop without solving it. Water keeps returning. The green interior of Bermuda is easy to overlook because the coast is louder. Trails, reserves, ponds, and shaded paths do not compete with the beaches for spectacle. Their value is quieter. They give the island room to breathe, hold habitat, soften the built environment, and protect small pieces of land from becoming only roads and roofs. These places also give the edit a necessary change of texture. After harbours and reefs, shade and footpaths help the viewer feel the island as a place people inhabit slowly. Shade gives the island a different kind of relief. Relief has value. A short walk inland can make the island feel less crowded without pretending it is large. The old railway trail is especially useful for understanding scale. A trail on a small island is not wilderness in the mainland sense. It is a narrow public memory of movement, fitted between homes, trees, water, and coast. People walk through it because space for ordinary exercise and quiet is valuable when land is limited. The trail turns history into motion. It lets the camera move through the island without pretending that every important Bermudian scene has to face the beach. A walking route can reveal scale better than another aerial. Walking reveals scale. Here, breathing room is not leftover land. It is part of how the island stays livable. These shaded pockets also give the island a public rhythm that is not built around shopping, hotels, or the shoreline. Even a few quiet steps can change the shape of the day here. Breathing room is also social. A shaded path gives residents a place to walk without buying anything, to move slowly, and to feel the island away from traffic and visitor demand. On a small land base, that kind of ordinary public calm helps people keep living close together. Reserves such as Walsingham, Blue Hole, and Spittle Pond matter because they interrupt the pressure to use every surface for building. In a place without rivers, small wetlands and protected areas take on more significance. They are ecological pockets, but they are also a social choice. Leave this piece alone because the island needs more than development. Protected pockets are especially important because small islands can lose ordinary nature quietly. One road widening, one building site, and one drainage change at a time can add up. Small losses matter more when the total is small. Small losses accumulate. The green interior needs a slower mood than Hamilton and a rougher texture than the beaches. Bermuda cannot create more land, so it has to decide which parts remain open enough for birds, trees, water, shade, and people who are not buying a ticket to anything. The interior is not vast wilderness. Its power comes from being limited and still defended. The green interior belongs in the resource question because it shows what people forget until it is gone. Breathing room. On a tiny island, quiet land is not leftover land. It supports health, memory, ecology, patience, and a kind of public life that does not invoice anyone immediately. At the West End, the Royal Naval Dockyard and the Great Sound show a different Bermuda. Wider water, heavier history, and an Atlantic gate built for strategic use. This was never just scenery. Dockyard existed because the island's position mattered. A small rock far from the mainland could become a naval station, a repair point, a defense node, and later, a visitor gateway. The West End also gives the film a broader frame after the close interior chapter. The water opens up, the history gets heavier, and the island's Atlantic position becomes visible again. The wider water resets the island's sense of scale. Scale opens again. The Great Sound gives the camera space, but it also explains why this end of the island could carry so much work. Protected water is a resource when land is scarce. It lets ships anchor, ferries move, visitors arrive, and old military stone find a second life. What once served empire now serves tourism, memory, and local movement. That protected water helps explain why a tiny island could matter to ships and governments. Geography was not abundant, but position could be turned into leverage. Position became useful because ships needed reliable edges. Position becomes leverage. That conversion is one of Bermuda's recurring skills. The island reassigns old infrastructure instead of abandoning it. Forts become heritage. Dockyard becomes a public and visitor zone. Harbours become both working edges and scenic assets. In a larger country, unused space can be forgotten. Here, the island keeps asking old places to work again. Reuse is one of the least glamorous but most important island skills. When land is limited, the past cannot simply be pushed aside. It has to be repaired, interpreted, and put back to work. Old infrastructure survives by finding new work. Reuse keeps history useful. The West End islands and coves soften that story. Boats, swimmers, rock edges, and sheltered water remind us that the strategic landscape is also a lived landscape. People come here for leisure, but the leisure sits inside a geography that once had very hard purposes. The contrast is what makes the place interesting. Those softer leisure images should not erase the harder history. They show how Bermuda layers use over time, placing relaxation on top of strategic ground without fully forgetting either one. Leisure here sits on strategic ground. Leisure covers strategy. Dockyard also brings the import story back. Cruise calls, ferry routes, visitor spending, maintenance, fuel, waste, and crowd flow all have to fit into the same small system. Arrival is never just arrival in Bermuda. It is pressure entering the island through a controlled gate. This is another place where beauty can hide operations. A cruise arrival looks festive, but it also creates schedules, waste, transport demand, security, retail pressure, and maintenance work. Arrival has consequences beyond the gangway. Arrival adds pressure. By the time the camera looks back across the Great Sound, Bermuda's resource logic is clearer. The island does not rely on abundance. It relies on reuse, reputation, maritime access, regulation, and careful staging. Dockyard makes that logic visible in stone and water, where defense, import, tourism, navigation, memory, and daily movement meet. After an hour of roofs, harbours, beaches, reefs, forts, trails, and offices, the answer is not that Bermuda has zero resources in a simple sense. The answer is sharper. Bermuda has very few forgiving resources. It has beauty, position, marine life, reputation, skilled people, and a habit of management. What it lacks is the margin that lets a place be careless. That distinction matters because it avoids exaggeration. The island is not empty of value. It is short on the kinds of resources that let a place grow casually without constant coordination. That is a stronger claim than pretending the island has nothing. The distinction matters. People stay because the island is more than a constraint. It is home, memory, work, family, church, sea air, school routes, ferry rides, familiar roads, and the knowledge of how things are done. Outsiders may first see cost or distance. Residents also see belonging. Scarcity does not cancel attachment. Sometimes it makes attachment more deliberate. Home is one reason outside analysis can miss the point. People do not live only inside spreadsheets of cost and supply. They live inside relationships, routines, obligations, and places they know by feel. Belonging explains what economics alone cannot. Belonging carries weight. The real Bermuda is not only the beach, and it is not only the finance office. It is the connection between them. Rain on roofs, cargo at harbour, rules in town, visitors on the coast, fish over reef, trails through trees, and homes fitted carefully into a narrow landscape. Each piece carries more than one responsibility. The ending should connect the chapters without repeating them as a list. The roof, harbour, reef, office, trail, beach, and fort are all different answers to the same constraint. The pieces matter because they keep returning to daily life. The pieces connect. That is why 60,000 people can live on this rock. Not because the rock gives them everything, but because the island has learned to organise what little it has, import what it cannot grow, protect what it cannot replace, and turn distance into value. Bermuda survives by design, habit, and trust. This is a stronger ending than calling Bermuda impossible. It is possible, but only because many small systems keep agreeing with each other, day after day. Ordinary life is the achievement, not the backdrop. Ordinary is earned. The closing image should leave the island quiet, not solved. The ocean is still wide, the land is still small. The roofs still wait for rain, the harbour still waits for the next arrival. And life continues because the people here understand something easy to miss from a postcard. On a small island, the future is built from daily discipline. The last thought should be calm, because the island itself is calm on the surface. The tension remains underneath. In the work required to keep ordinary life ordinary, the surface stays quiet, because the work underneath continues. The work continues.